It's really cold in Istanbul. Are you in Berlin right now?
Yeah, but yeah, it's really cold here.
Yeah, it's January. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Well, I must say I'm actually really thrilled to have this video interview with you, because when I initially started out as a music writer like 5 years ago, one of the first reviews I penned was, "What kind of dystopian hellhole is this?"
Oh, really?
Yeah, so now it feels like things have come full circle in a way, and even more so in March when we will be able to meet in flash in your concert here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Yeah,
that's really interesting, but great.
yeah. It's it feels good. It feels good to have you here. Yeah. So I'm actually starting off with a really basic question here. What is the underground youth through your eyes, in the eyes of its creator?
I guess I mean it's been quite a long time now since I started the project. So it's changed, I think, quite a lot since when I first began, which was 2008. And it began as like basically I was just starting to write and record songs, and I had no outlet for them at that point. Like it was just a case of me putting them up online and just getting people interested. And this was a name for the group that I came up with just really fast without thinking too much about it. And I guess it kind of all stuck from there, and it grew and grew and became a live band. We got signed to a label. We had records made, and it just moved on like this, and it became really like a career more than just this passion project which it started out as. So through my eyes, it's quite difficult to say exactly what it is, because for me it's been my entire life for the past 12 years, and it's gone through so many changes, but it's essentially, first and foremost, it's an outlet for me, like any creative idea I have, or certainly musical, and also through writing. It's sort of it's me, and in the same way as a writer, you would put out your material. As a filmmaker, you would make films. As a musician, you make records, and that's sort of what I do. And the Underground Youth is merely just the vessel which holds everything which I kind of come up with year after year.
Yeah, and I am really eager to find out more about your current creative plans as an artist, and have questions about your more recent output. But for that, I want to focus on the name Underground Youth, because I believe it's just a brilliant name for a project of your nature. Today, more and more young people listen to and make dark underground music, and I see extremely inspiring forms of creativity all around me, as here in Istanbul, for instance. Do you feel the same way in Berlin and the cities you tour in?
Yeah, for sure. I think I think for me it feels like it's always kind of been the same, but then I've never branched out for it to be bigger than the underground scene, whether it was when we were in Manchester or now we're in Berlin. But I mean, every city we go to, the majority of people who come to our shows, the people who are listeners, the people who buy the records, I think they come from sort of a much more independent-minded underground scene. We've never broken even close to like a mainstream audience, or like a more widespread sort of fandom in a way. It's always been this underground scene, which, like I said before, like naming the project the Underground Youth was never something I had in mind. Like, okay, this is perfectly relative to what it is that I'm going to do with this project, because at the time I had no idea it would become anything. The fact that now, however many years down the line, almost 15 years later, it's become very relevant that the project is named something which it kind of still fits into a category of. But sure, like I think that also appeals to people when the fans of the project and the people who listen to the music, they feel that sort of like it has this underground feel. It has this sort of cult vibe to it. because of that. You have to discover it for yourself. It's not played on the radio or pushed at you in other ways.
Yeah, and obviously the music industry is still struggling to effectively move beyond the days of lockdown. But as an individual who frequently goes to the concerts and events of the Istanbul underground scene, I feel like the part of a community that appears more alive and united than ever in a way, despite the difficulties, at least spiritually. And do you think the pandemic and our recent struggles in isolation connected the people from the counterculture art scene stronger than before in a way?
Yeah, I think it still needs more time. I think because it's still, I mean, none of us obviously knew how long this was going to last for. I think if you'd ask people in the beginning if it was still going to be going on now, most people would have said no, it would be over by now. But that's obviously not the case, and I think we still have more time living in this way of uncertainty. For us, like, certainly, I mean, we managed to do one short tour last year, where we played a couple of weeks on the road through Europe, and it sort of felt like things were back to normal. There weren't as many people at the shows, maybe, but there was this sort of vibe from the audience, like they were happy to be back. You know, it was great to go out and see live music again, and it was exciting to have that. That what had been taken away from you for the past year and a half, to suddenly be able to do that again, which was a great feeling. But then as soon as we got back to Berlin after that tour, like, all our friends got their tours cancelled, and you know, it was sort of over the Christmas period, it sort of felt like things went back over to how it was before that. And now we have this tour booked, and obviously we're very excited about it, but you don't get excited about a tour in the same way you used to, because there's still not 100% certainty that everything can go ahead and that you will manage to make all the dates, or that there won't be cancellations. So I think it will take time, but I think in years to come, like, people will look back on this, if they lived through it, and sort of be appreciative of having that taken away for a while, and then now to have it back, to be able to go to live shows, to be able to appreciate live music. I think people will have a renewed sort of sense of community around that.
And before we move on to the actual moments, I want to reminisce a little about an earlier interview I done last year with James Stewart from Shushu, and we talked about how the internet age opened up what was before called alternative music to a much wider audience. And he recalled that music was much of a cultural identifier in his childhood days than it is now. He also observed that, for instance, no jock used to listen to The Cure back then, but everybody listens to everything now. Do you think the dynamics of underground music have shifted since you were a child?
Oh, yeah, well, certainly. I mean, even in the past 10 years, 10, 20 years, I think, I mean, as you said, like, the idea of the internet, I think, was the huge catalyst for change in music, even down to like what became the mainstream, what would become the mainstream music. If you look at a band like, I don't know, like the Arctic Monkeys, for example, who would not have existed in the same way had they not had this sort of online presence, which was something I experienced growing up, because when I was at university, the only bands I would know, I would have to read about in Enemy magazine, or you had to be told about them by other people you knew who had seen a live show. And that's really, we're not going back very long here. And then that was the case. But because of the internet, because of MySpace and all these other websites, which made it like a social media presence for the bands, and you could put videos on YouTube. You didn't have to pay for the promotion. You were basically relying on people sharing things, as it still exists today. But unfortunately today it's been warped quite a bit by the companies, I think, realized how much power they actually had, the social media aspect to it, with Facebook and Instagram, and these platforms can really control how much they allow you to access the followers you have. So I think we kind of saw this rise of the internet making it easy for artists to be noticed, to the point where it became so easy and so free as well, that you were getting this this easy access to people, that they finally managed to put a price on it, and now they hold you from accessing everyone that follows you, because they want you to pay for advertising, and they want you to pay for plugging, so that they can get some money out of the wheel that is turning, you know?
Yeah.
So but I mean, it's certainly, I mean, to go back before this was even possible, it was obviously a lot harder. But I think as it got easier with the internet making it much more possible for young bands to become noticed and become heard, it's also become harder again, because now this sort of whirlwind of so many bands, so many projects, so many people, and then at the top of it you have these companies who try and make money out of people's desire to be heard by their followers.
Yeah, it seems a lot like the lines between mainstream and what's outside mainstream have been blurred a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it can work in both ways. I think it sort of, in a way, it kind of pushes down what was outside of the mainstream, because into even different layers. So you get like bands who are an underground or a cult band, becoming even pushed even further down, which, I mean, is not necessarily a bad thing, because there's just so many more layers now. But at the same time, you have those at the top of what would essentially have been underground music 25, 30 years ago, now can also enter into the mainstream and be heard by a much wider audience.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so well, while some of your music have largely been defined as post-punk, it is really yeah, your sound is actually a combination of inspirations and genres. And for starters, the song that gave the band its name is very Bob Dylan-esque, in my opinion. Yeah. And your last studio record is more folksy, and your collaborative EP with Laura Carbone covers the song from another great artist, Roy Orbison. Yeah, before we talked about how we shift between genres, let's talk about how that record came to be.
I mean, for me, it's hard to define the sound as what it is. I think in the beginning, because like you say, I mean, the song that gave the band its name was one of the first ones I wrote, and this came from my sort of area of writing in the style of the simplest thing I could do. You know, if it's 3 chords on an acoustic guitar, and you know, just writing I was incredibly influenced by Bob Dylan at the time, which is obvious. And then the rest of the songs, especially from the early records, it was all very derivative of what I loved and listened to. All the sort of bands which inspired me, I guess. And then through that, I kind of developed what would become what I consider to be the underground youth sound, which is sort of what I took from these different sources, the different influences, and sort of formed into something which became very specific to how I write and record. So that became the sound. But then obviously I don't want to get, I don't like the idea of an artist staying in the same place just because it's safe. You have the audience, you have a fan base. It's much more exciting for me to branch out and try other things and make music that just appeals to me, but also doesn't keep me stuck in the same place. Which, I mean, with the last record, The Falling, it was also a product of the time we recorded it, because we couldn't go to the studio because of the lockdown. We were in isolation. Yeah. And this sort of lent itself to having much more personal time to sort of work on different sounds and arrangements. And that's sort of the birth of how it became. I mean, it was already going to be an acoustic based record, but there was a lot less playing around in the studio. There was a lot more sort of experimenting at home. So yeah, I think the sound, and I mean, there were people who are fans of the band who weren't that happy with the record. It's like it wasn't sort of what they want from this band. But for me, I would never want to make the same record over and over again. I like the idea of continually playing different things and experimenting with different sounds. So in that sense, for me, I don't consider the Underground Youth to have a specific sound. I mean, it will always be it will stem from what I enjoy listening to, essentially. So they obviously all will come together at some point, but it's always going to be different, I hope.
Yeah. And the latest EP with Laura Carbone is both duets and covers. That's a whole other concept. How did you approach that?
I mean, yeah, this was like last year. Well, actually, not last year. Now it was because it was in 2020, but we were in the depths of the lockdown period, and I think Laura just wrote to me and said, "Hey, like I'm pretty bored. We've not got much to do. Do you fancy recording some cover songs together?" And we toyed around with a few different ideas, and then I just said, "Hey, let's do a few Roy Orbison songs, and then let's see how it works, and maybe we can release it." And yeah, we met up a few times and came up with the arrangements, and we recorded it really fast, just at home, super simple. And then her record label were interested, and we had Scott Van Riper from the Jesus and Mary Chain and Black Rider. He was interested in doing the mixing, so it just turned into a little project that we were super happy with. But it was something which would never have happened had it not been for the pandemic, had it not been for the lockdown. It was kind of two artists who were pretty bored for a few months and wanted something to do creatively, and so we just that was the product of that.
Yeah.
It's not by any stretch like a move to where the Underground Youth is going in the future or where Laura herself is going. It was just, let's just do this as a sort of a one-off thing.
Yeah, I can't tell you like how many artists have told me they've done projects with collaborations in specific out of pure boredom and with the mindset of let's try this. It's it is special in some way, the way the artists collaborate under these circumstances.
Yeah, I think sometimes it gives you like a little bit of I mean, it can be quite hard, especially if you're alone. Then if it can be easy to work on things on your own, but you don't get as much gratification from that. It's much nicer to have someone else to bounce ideas off and to bounce the actual process of recording. It gives an extra added element of enjoyment to the process of recording music, which I mean is obviously something people have sought out during the pandemic also, because we're lacking that connection with people that you get from live shows or being able to go to a studio. If you can't be around your band members, then you kind of lack that connection. So it's nice that one of the few positive things to come out of the whole thing is that people have reached out and tried to create something with other artists.
Yeah. So I believe the songs and artists someone listens to at the current time can be can possibly be an indicator on where their sound is going to. So I just wonder, what have you been listening to these days?
Okay, that's interesting. Well, I've already started. We've just started working on some new songs that will be the next record.
Yeah.
It's very early, but like I've been listening to a lot more noisy music, a lot of like old like Japanese noise music, and so cool. I think like I also I mean I go through periods of listening to Swans a lot, and that's sort of a sound which I think is going to be very inspirational to the next record. I'm much looking to move back into something which is a lot more brutally sort of exciting musically, and then combining that with this sort of lyrical sense of the writing that I implemented quite a lot on The Falling, because that album for me was very much a show of the writing, the lyrics. But I want to combine that now with quite a visceral, loud and noisy record, which also, I think the band, it's a much more relative sound to the live band. So I think it will be nice to sort of bring that back after The Falling and after having this break of not touring so much. It'll be nice to actually go into a studio and make a lot of noise. And I think that's sort of the direction the new record will go.
I guess you must have been listening to the late period of Swans.
Both. I enjoy the early stuff too. I mean, you can't listen to it quite as much, but I every now and then I'll listen to Phil for it's,
I totally forgot about that. The earliest period is the most brutal. I for a second I thought Wild Light from the Mouth of Infinity, and that's the really folksy records. But thanks for reminding me of that brutal early period.
It can be a bit too brutal at times, but there's some really interesting instrumental work, and I think Michael's lyrics and his delivery of them is one of the most fascinating things in underground music.
Yeah. By the way, you're also interested in poetry, right?
Sure, yeah. I mean, it stems from that I write at all, so yeah.
Well, of course, naming your biggest inspirations in general can be like an insufficient question, but can you think of some of the poets, like a few that instantly comes to mind, who inspired you like a lot in that realm?
I think from a writing perspective, when it comes to music specifically, I mean, obviously to go back to the earliest thing, it was why I started making music was because I had started writing because of Bob Dylan, and I listened to Leonard Cohen, and I saw that sort of poetry in the language of what they were writing, and how simply it can be applied to music. Because I was not taught how to make music. I taught myself how to play a guitar very simply, how to put things together, and that was very much more a background to my actual passion, which was to try and write words which said something, and that was where it came from. Patti Smith, Leonard Cohen, Bob Dylan, as poets as much as the music they created. But also, I mean, I don't know, it can delve, like my reading taste is quite varied in from where I come from. I mean, obviously, I think most people in the sort of coming from a musical space that I am, you're inspired by the people who inspired them. So in this case, like the Beat Generation poets, Ginsberg and Burroughs and Bukowski, and these people who wrote without care for the form of poetry. Not thinking about the way that it should be done. It's not Walt Whitman. It's much more. It's a brand new way of writing. And then I guess like the poetry and the writing of what else I've picked up. It's quite a difficult question, I guess, because it's hard to say. I mean, you pick up little things from everywhere. I mean, I could also find the poetry in the language of the fiction that I read. It's not necessarily through poets. So yeah, it's a very vast thing to be influenced by the written word.
Yeah. So you're coming to visit Istanbul for a concert real soon, and I was recently surprised when I checked your Spotify statistics that it appears that Istanbul hosts the biggest portion of your listeners, according to Spotify. Isn't that interesting?
This was crazy news to us as well when we saw this. I mean, I had no idea we had a fan base at all. I mean, for us, like booking tours, it's done by our booking agent. Like he will book the shows that people show interest for us to play in places. So we'd never been invited to come and play in Istanbul, so we never assumed there was a demand for that kind of show. And then when we got access to see the actual stats for Spotify and could finally have a look at this, and then we saw, I think it's like the second biggest city in the list of cities after Berlin, I think. And it's, yeah, I mean, it was exciting because it's a country we've never been to, and it's a country we've never performed in. So it's interesting to know that people are listening to the music, or, I mean, for us, it asks the question of how people actually heard about the band, whether it's through YouTube or like, I don't know. But it's always exciting to know that there's a country you've never been to and performed, which actually do appreciate your music, because it means there's a new territory for you to go to and perform in front of people.
Yep. And people like to share their the bands they love with their friends. I know I shared you with my friends.
But where did you hear it for the first time?
Well, I guess I was looking for through. Well, I don't remember which platform, but yeah, I decided to pen a review as soon as I heard what kind of dystopian hell is this. That's the first time I heard you, and yeah, but I'm not sure which platform or through whom. Yeah, it's just a wonder of internet, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like we were saying before, I mean, this kind of thing would not be possible 15, 20 years ago in the same way that it is today.
Yeah.
So it's one of the many benefits of having that easy access across all platforms.
Yeah. So now is the time for my closing question, and it is a common question that I ask nearly everyone I interview.
Okay.
And it's this. Okay, so imagine you're 100 years into the future, and there's a musicians theme park, and everyone has a memorial stone in their name, including the underground youth. If you could select a specific lyric you have written so far to be written on it, what would it be?
So I have to choose one specific lyric?
Let's say two.
Two, okay.
For it to be easier, yeah.
I'm trying to think, like, if I even consider any of them as good as what I've written recently. I think maybe it come from the last record. Hang on, let me.
Okay.
So when I forget what I've written in the past, I have like my actual book,
Wow.
like right by my desk.
Your lyrics book.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cool. Okay.
Let me just see if I can find.
From The Falling, right?
I think just because it's the most recent. Like for me, I will always consider what I've done most recently to be the best, even if it's not necessarily true. It sort of like feels that way for me. Now I can't find this. Just. Maybe I could recite it from memory, but if I got it wrong, that would be really frustrating.
Yeah, we could correct it in editing.
Well, I found it now. Okay, so it's a lyric from the first single we released from The Falling, Sorrowful Race, because I think it perfectly sums up sort of not so much I mean, the anger and contempt that I feel towards the industry is kind of a side point here, even though it's in the lyrics. The main point is the fact that regardless of how the project has ever been, whether it was popular or whether one person listened, I would still continue to write and record music. So I mean, I'll just do one lyric because it's 2 sentences. So
Okay.
Why he's achieved so much more than I in such a short amount of time. Well, I'll never understand how or why. I'll just keep writing line after line after line after line after line after line after line.
I think it fits perfectly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the spirit of the project, is that I will continue to do it until I personally don't want to anymore, regardless of what else is happening.
Yeah.